the endless knowledge you can learn from it is just epic.
Why do you think so many wine professionals struggle at making money?
Wow. Okay. So if you demystify wine, you actually do take away a lot of its beauty.
I didn't realize that you had a winery. So what has producing wine and selling wine taught you? I shot this podcast with Jimmy Smith, aka Wine with Jimmy. Anybody who's ever studied for WSET knows this guy. I met him in San Gimignano a couple months ago and we got along really well. In this conversation, we talk about, is wine education important? What about wine influencers and other deeper topics when it comes to wine, especially when it comes to making money as a wine professional? I think you're really going to enjoy it. Let's get on to the podcast. Where did the idea about Wine with Jimmy come from?
Well, it was a COVID baby, right? So it was a COVID baby. We had already set up a wine bar and a wine school in London. And Wine with Jimmy was one of those changes when we all remember the word pivot that we had to use, and whenever I think of that word pivot, which was commonly used, I just think of Ross Geller out of Friends. That That's exactly what we were doing, except I wasn't carrying a sofa. But yeah, it was a moment in time when we had flipped our wine bar to a wine shop. Our wine school went online, and then so many people in the world suddenly found themselves just, spending lots of time on the internet, right? And we got flooded from people in the US mainly, which is today my major market for Wine with Jimmy, because they were checking out some of the videos we we're putting up, but those videos initially were solely for the use of my students here in the UK. We were adding a supplementary resource for them. And then I got a load of people commenting, so this is great. Let's get this done. Let's get this out. It'll be really good to see more of this. And I had conversations with people that are much greater than me, namely my better half, who is the brains and the beauty behind what we do. And she goes, "You got to do this." So we started building up those very early videos for the resource portal for level 3, and it kicked off from there. We started monetizing it, and the model that we have is a model that I went off and was walking the dogs as much as I can during COVID. Within the legal frame lines. But I was learning languages. I was learning French. I was learning a little bit of Spanish, and I was getting all this free content. And then it got to a point like 2 seasons on in this language course where they say, look, it's now going to be 69.99 to continue. And I was like, done. I'm doing this. Yeah, big time. This is really useful. So we employed the same model where we want to let everybody out there know the content's great. So we put out a lot of free content that people believe that, they can't live without. It's going to help them with their studies. And of course, they then sign up to our, much more exclusive portal that has, much greater resources available to them.
What? So you started out as an educator, and this was just an addition, just an add-on, because you're known as like in the wine industry, everybody knows Wine with Jimmy. What they're studying for the diploma or level 2 or level 3, everybody knows about you. But you were an educator first, and this was just for your students. That's what I'm trying to clarify here.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I set up West London Wine School back in 2008, 2009, in another crisis, right? Which was the credit crunch. Did we call it the credit crunch? I think we did, didn't we? Yeah. So it was a difficult time economically for a lot of people, a very big dip economically. So we set up the school. Well, I set up the school back then, and I was already teaching. I was teaching before then for a major, what you guys would call out in the States, an off license, a liquor store chain. We call it an off license chain. And I was teaching wine for them for WSET, and I was heading up their education, but unfortunately they struggled through those times and eventually went into administration. So I set up my school, West London Wine School, and with the aim of really teaching wine for everybody. So for the first almost 10 years, it was just me and the wine school. Started to employ a team behind me. Then I opened up my wine bar in 2016, and then Wine with Jimmy as a global business came along in 2020, 2021.
Well, let's talk about WSET. Not that they're sponsoring this, although they should. My goodness, why you've taught students, you get the feedback. Why do you think it's so valuable in today's wine world? Not only for wine professionals, but for people that just want to enjoy wine. And for people that don't know, it's Wine Spirits Education Trust. It's a British education system. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I mean, first and foremost, there are other qualifications out there, that you can go for, and they're all have really good merit behind them. So there's some very great qualifications out there. But WSET, the Wine and Spirit Education Trust, was the first, created right at the end of the '60s here in the UK, and
I
had
didn't know that,
a
by
lot.
the way. Yeah, I didn't know that. Let's okay.
Yeah, no. Yeah, it's been around quite a long time, and it carved a reputation really for being the gold standard in wine education. Um, it certainly offers real great comprehensive knowledge of the world of wine. It potentially was a little bit sort of UK focused in its early days, which you'd expect it to be, but it certainly has diversified globally today. So they're offering a real great progression from levels one up to diploma, and then really good materials behind it. Certainly good, fairly decent textbooks. But yes, for me, taking on that, I started as head of education for Thresher Group, building this. It was this course called the Wine Rec Wine School, and I really made a name for myself. And I was only 24, 25, and I can't believe I did that. I mean, I can't believe I had the guts because I was quite a shy, believe it or not, quite a shy person, certainly in my teenage years. But I had the guts to sort of really carve this reputation here in the UK for building a wine program, and then going on to teach WSET, right? Teaching WSET level 1, 2, and 3 for this major company, and doing it at a fairly, I hope, fairly decent job. But I reckon if I look at some VT footage, which there's none available, I hope so anyway. But if it was to exist of me teaching in those days, I'll be like, oh my god, what am I saying? But it was 20 odd years ago, so it's certainly something that's given me a foundation. I was very close to WSET in those days. Then I set up West London Wine School, really built that up. And it's the pillar, always has been the pillar, the major focus of West London Wine School. It's certainly the biggest amount of offering that we have. So we do other courses, we do our in-house courses, introductory courses, cheese and wine, you name it. We do Wine Scholar Guild, Valpolicella education program. There's a big list of these that goes on. But the fundamental is WSET because the model for the school is certainly to get, as you mentioned, the wealth of people, be it trade or consumer, which is about half and half in my bricks and mortar school in Fulham, get them to come through our progression program. And I want somebody to stay with us for years. I don't just want someone to dip their toes in, once in a while, or even just once and then go elsewhere. I want them to come through our introductory programs, then work through WSET, and then work through bolt-ons, fine wine tastings, specialist tastings, go through Wine Scholar Guild, Rioja Academy, Gran Tagos de España, and keep learning. And that's what we've got. We've got a core amount of brilliant regulars. I like to call them irregulars. It's because, of course, the consumption, but in moderation. But these guys are just brilliant. They're wonderful, and they stay with us, right? And they've been with us for years. Some of them 10 years, some of them 15 years. And that is something that I've been very much a big protagonist for. Certainly when I've done a lot of guest speaking, keynote speaking, is understanding that a consumer, you spend tons of money trying to get them into your business, but it's very important to actually keep them there and keep them interested over that progression. It's super, super important. So I suppose for us as well, adding on to that, we have our other hats. We have our wine bar, we have our winery, and then we have our Wine with Jimmy as well. So there's plenty of things to keep people within the kind of, sphere that we have.
The
So I heard
ecosystem.
the ecosystem I like, because someone called it an empire the other day, and I was like, please don't call it an empire. I really want to move away from imperial thinking, but yeah, that's
Speaking of which, I just finished up the first season of Andor last night, actually, with a lot of British actors, actually. Nice to hear the British
well,
accent.
we're very, very cheap. That's the key thing about the actors, and in things like Andor, yeah, it's great series. But yeah, Brits are cheap. They're cheaper than the Americans.
Everything's expensive in America these days. Let's talk about some of the so I actually skipped ahead. I just took 3. That's the only certification I took because 1 and 2 had already been in wine for a long time. I didn't wanna go through it.
Yeah.
There's some really valuable parts. Let's talk about one of the criticisms of WSAT. A lot of people criticize and feel like it's made wine too standard. I'd
Mm.
like to hit your take on it because that's not where I stand. I actually stand on a more positive side, but that's the biggest kind of criticism for WSAT, especially the tasting.
Yeah, I mean, they've forged a path, haven't they, for their formula. They have this quite they call it, the systematic approach. That's the tasting, but I'd say the systematic approach is actually across their theory as well. It's a very standardized, generalized view of things, and that's very much the teaching that goes through WSET School London. They teach to the letter, which is look, they have to do it a certain way. They have to kind of um, they have to go through their own process. It's very different in other schools around the world who tend to sort of teach the subject, but then around the subject, and that's something I'm quite keen on. So I have a little bit of, I suppose, a disconnect because I like to indulge the student. I know we need to get an individual student through an examination process, and the best thing to do is stick to the syllabus. But I also love to see their eyes light up, when they are investigating themselves, maybe sort of outside the syllabus, but it's starting to make their mind tick, and they really get sort of into it. And they might ask a question about really the semantics of semi-carbonic maceration, but they only need to know a six-pointer about it. But they're going really into the details. I'm not going to stop that process. I'm actually going to nurture it. I'm going to fuel the fire a little bit. I don't mind it. I have to make sure that I can't completely let it go out of control because you're on a time limit. So there is always conversations that can be had around the time of a course, which can be in emails, can be in conversations afterward, which is what I love to do because I think that student teacher relationship of commitment and nurturing that real desire is what's going to get them through the course. I really don't like it if somebody is told that you don't need to know that, so just move on from it. It's not something that I'm keen on. So there's a bit of a disconnect there, but I understand that they need to police a major wine qualification, which is administered by Ofcal in the UK, which gives it obviously massive legal credibility as a proper qualification, right? And they need to line by line, text by text, sentence by sentence. They need to follow the script, and I get that, but I think it's really where alternative schools, which generally are more family sort of led, like mine, for instance, smaller classroom sizes, certainly can indulge a student a little bit in that sort of area. So yeah, there is a bit of a disconnect. I do hear students, talk to us about the issues they may have around certain courses, not just WST, but around the world and how things are taught. And that's always going to happen. It doesn't matter if it's in wine, it could be in any kind of education in the world. But potentially there are issues with the textbook. Some people find it's just a dump of information, and that it should be potentially more interactive. And then, of course, the lack of online resources, which WSET have historically had, they've adapted a little bit. But of course, Wine with Jimmy would have never grown as exponentially as it has done if it wasn't for WSET focusing really on their core principles and not developing their online resources as much. And that's where Wine with Jimmy comes in. And of course, now we have such a huge wealth of those extracurricular resources, be it mapped, multiple choice, written questions, and of course, all of my exclusive video content. That's what's really sort of helping students connect the dots if they feel like they aren't experiencing the expectation that they want, right? They sign up for this prestigious course. It may be at WSET, it might be elsewhere in the world, but if they feel like they're at a disadvantage because maybe it's their own personal circumstances where life's got in the way, or maybe it's because of an individual school, it could be anything. That is where we can help them. We help students' anxiety levels. We try to sort of bring them in and say, look, we can help you get through this remotely, where you have a evergreen pre-recorded me to sort of teach you through the course. And that's the real crux of it. So, you know, every organization, every person's not perfect. They've done a damn good job, WSET, of creating something which is a global phenomenon, and it's well respected, as I mentioned earlier, gold standard. But of course, it's not perfect. And
Well, I think you need
yeah,
to
that's right.
I think there's a baseline, like, like, I know it's a cliche statement, but you have to learn the rules before you break them. I know that wine's a very personal thing, but I think it does arm people with information, especially the tasting. I think the most valuable part is the tasting, where people can taste wines from all over the world with guidance, because
Mm,
if they just buy blindly, they don't know where they're buying. Just like, in the US at least, where most of the wines on the supermarket shelf are made by only a few different companies, just bottled differently.
hmm hmm
That's incredibly valuable. Do you think, it's a controversial statement, as do you think that people do need to know about wine to enjoy it?
Uh, well, I mean, certainly people. It depends on their circumstance. It depends on their, availability financially, their own desires, needs, and expectations. I mean, if you are somebody who really doesn't drink wine too frequently, and maybe is in under the understanding in your own bubble, your own world, that really I should have a wine with a certain type of thing. Occasionally, maybe I'm barbecuing and that's when I should serve something, and or maybe I'm serving some pasta and I know the Italians have wine with pasta, things like that. Then I think you're going to draw enough enjoyment from that just by doing it yourself. You might actually sort of stretch out and ask for some advice and so on. But you can get that. I think today there's plenty of social media, and of course, social media is not governed, and there are problems with that. There's a lot of problems with it, incorrect content, and we may blow it up and call it false news in today's day and age. But yeah, I mean, there are people that certainly won't need that to enjoy it. But there are then people, I think, who have aspirations to, maybe these are the people that aspire to really step up in terms of when they want to get fit, they sign up to a gym. When they're starting to cook a lot more, then they sign up to a cookery class or they follow some videos. And these kind of people, it's a different mindset, right? Really, where you enjoy learning about a process to get to the end goal. And I think those people are the people that we are going to tap into. And it gets really complex, Matty, when we talk about Generation Z, because we need to stop as a wine education, as a global wine business, we need to stop saying, "Oh, what are Generation Z doing? They're crazy. They talk funny and blah blah blah." All this sort of stuff. It's been always like this. I can guarantee you when we were kids, we talked weird to our elders. They didn't get us. They didn't understand us. I know it's a different world with social media and there's a different sort of online presence and a footprint today. But I do think that that's going to be something that we're all starting to figure out how to talk to them. No, sorry, how to talk with them, not to them. And that's an interesting one. So I think there's a lot of different demographics to answer that question. The first group, I think some people don't need to enjoy it. Some people will get a thrill out of learning and certainly going professionally into it. They might take that a step further. And that's probably where a lot of my businesses come into play, certainly by getting bitten by the wine bug. Specifically, those people are great because, you throw multi-disciplines at them, right? They go on an introductory course to you. It's not just you going, this is wine, pour it in your glass. It's wine. Yeah, it's alcohol. Hey, you start to actually say, don't you go through, look, there's biology in wine, there's chemistry in wine, there's geography, there's geology, there's social responsibility, there's politics, there's history. And you go through all of those. And at some point in a group, you'll see somebody if you start banging on about some history, somebody be like, oh, and then you bang on about some geology and you're going into some sort of soil stuff and how it could infect, is sort of influence the wine. And then somebody else would light up. And that's the beauty, the multidiscipline. And that's what hooks a number of people into the world of wine. And I've used that little speech I've used a lot in the past because I've been employed by major organizations here in the UK and in the US to teach people that often they don't want to be there, right? Hotel chains, whatever, their staff members who it's written into their progression plan that they have to attend a WSET level 1 course. You ask them at the start of the course, you go, look, who wants to be here, really? And everyone's a bit scared. So look, who drinks wine? And then there's about half the group that do, maybe even less, and the rest said, no, never really tried it. And that's interesting because they're the people that are really, really difficult to convert if you do it conventionally and you just start talking to them. But learn about what they like in the world, how to connect to them through one of those disciplines or even more creatively. And that's how you're going to get those people in. So there's a bit of a crossover. Sorry, the answer's a very long one, and I think I
Oh,
could
a
go
great
on
answer.
more.
It's a great
There's a
answer.
lot. There's a lot more I think I could answer to
And
that.
gosh, I want to expand on so much that you said. We're going to go back to something about WSET, but I want to touch on something that you talked about, social media, because you do have a social media presence and you are about education information. You talk about misinformation that's conveyed across social media. I'd like you to touch on that. For me in wine, it's extremely difficult sometimes to get the correct information, even as me that used to be a wine writer. Now I just do this full time because a lot of regions actually don't have the right information because it's a lot of work. Uh,
Mm.
Consortios or wine regions. On top of that, a lot of, especially in wine journalism, a lot of it's hearsay. People just kind of write down what producers tell you. Producers have different political motivations, or they're just people too. Like they can't know everything about a region. They're concerned about running their own business. You want to talk about about the problem with misinformation on social media and wine? Not only wine, just in general. Let's stick to wine for now. We keep going down the rabbit
Well,
hole, but
I mean, like I alluded to earlier, it's not governed, right? So it really, I mean, you need to do your own research. You need to do your own digging into what you're learning. Because if you take these comments and videos and things like that at face value, it's complex because it could be that you're just being drip fed advertisement, right? Paid for advertisement. Not all social media influencers are honest about how they are paid and how, it's not in their bio, it's not in the description that they are ads, etc. So you are fed a discourse, you're fed a narrative. And then there are people that I've seen that some of the information is just not true, and it's not necessarily it's been fed to them. It's them that are creating this content. It might be for what I call shock and awe. It might be for just getting the clicks and the clickbait, etc. So that's really interesting. But I do have to say, on the other side of this, there are a lot of really good influencers who are able to connect with people that often conventional wine communicators can't connect with. They are connecting with larger markets who are fed up with maybe too much information, too much, of the doldrums of the world of wine, which, we've historically always said this. It's a massively overused phrase and has been now for 20 years. Demystifying wine is an annoying phrase because if you demystify wine, you actually do take away a lot of its beauty. You can simplify wine to help people understand certain key factors, but you should never end up with the end goal being demystifying wine because the endless knowledge you can learn from it is just epic. So I would be superbly careful around those kind of things. Look, and you mentioned about my sort of like social media. I'm a little bit sort of atypical because I think the typicity today is to use major platforms such as Instagram and TikTok. And things like Instagram are actually secondary for me. My major focus is YouTube. And of course, with you as well, Matty, we of course bonded over this in San Gimignano. And this is something which is quite interesting because YouTube it is seen as something a little bit Jurassic by some of the modern day influencers. But what I can do on and what you can do certainly as well on YouTube is the content you can get significant amount of quality content out there, which has I could put a 50-minute video out and it gets watched repeatedly.
And it lives
Whereas
forever, and it lives forever. That's the thing.
yeah, 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 that evergreen thing is so important for Wine with Jimmy as well, and then it feeds in also to the model, my greater model of bringing people into my ecosystem, as you mentioned it. Not we're not let's not do the death march now or whatever, anything like that, but they're into the ecosystem for sure. They bring people in that way. There are added benefits there because there are things like ads, and I'm not talking about getting paid for advertising. That's not important for me on YouTube, but it's actually the model of having ads, and then if you sign up to my portal, there are no ads, and that's a huge bonus for you to go, through that model, through that change, to then have I suppose, a cleaner experience when you go through it. So yeah, I think there's so much more we can unpack from your question there as well, because
Well,
that
I wanna touch
world.
I wanna get into it a little bit more. Well, first of all, let's just a quick sidetrack of YouTube. I like a lot of people think is Jurassic because let's face it, not a lot of people know how to create great content, and YouTube favors great content. That's how videos get pushed. If the content's good, people watch it. Nobody and, falling in love with the camera is a skill in itself.
Mm,
I tell people when they ask me about YouTube, I was like, "You're gonna make 100 crappy videos, probably more than that." I've made even more, and I don't even think I'm even close to where I wanna be. You have to fall in love with the lens, and that's a very difficult skill, extremely
mm.
difficult. You mentioned that you like a couple of influencers like me. There's a couple ideas that I really value and I see what they're doing. Not everybody, that's a small minority. Are there a few that you really like what they're doing, their content, how they're connecting with consumers?
Yeah, yeah, there are some. Of course, this is a question that's been thrown at me, and I've not done any of pre-preparation, so now I have to access a part of my brain, Matt, that is muddled by thoughts from like children's songs and CBeebies and Disney and things like that. It's a complex area for me to get into. Yeah, there are some absolutely great ones out there, and you can see how they are doing really great stuff because, of course, they've got such a huge following behind them. And it may be people like yourself, but also people like Kathleen Smith up in New England who
Yeah,
does some great
just
things.
saw
I
her.
think she's just an absolute wonderful person, which I met at the Boston Wine Expo earlier this year. And the news is that we're going to start doing a bit of work together, which is really exciting. Very much respecting on your side of the pond. On our side of things, there are some big sort of celebrities almost, you would say, that are doing good things, able to connect in a very sort of British off the cuff way. And it might be the likes of, Tom Gilby, for
Mhm.
example. I mentioned earlier that there are people able to connect with maybe Generation Z and people that really are not easy to get hooked into wine. And people like there's a guy called Liam here in the UK. He's called the Wine Wally. He's doing really interesting content as well. I think it's very impressive around the sort of the UK is about 80%, 75, 80% supermarket, multiple grocer led, and he very much is in that market, doing it very well. So there are people like that as well, and then there are bigger names as well. But I could name drop a few more, but I'd have to sit and think. I do want to mention one thing though.
Yep.
I think what one thing that's very very worth that every influencer out there needs to seriously think about is actually realism instead of polished. And what I mean by that is please let real life not it doesn't have to be. I mean, I'm big not having like I don't want my children anywhere near social media. You'll never see them. Only in Studio Ghibli at Japanese anime form will you ever see them on my social media. So you never see them properly. And you won't see my real life in terms of my house and things like that. But what I mean by realism is everybody makes mistakes constantly, you know. Matty, it might have been that you're a bit late today coming onto this,
Yeah,
onto this.
that's true.
Um, I'm sorry, I'm just
No, you can bless. I actually, I was really mad at myself. I value people's time, and I get so mad if I'm just a little bit late, but I was running late today. My apologies. You can bust my balls all you want. It's all I can. I'm a big boy. I can take it.
yeah, so that real life is super important because one of the biggest moments in time for me with that realism is, I film my content. A lot of my content is done in one shoot. Sometimes there might be a couple of takes, but it typically is done quite quickly. And I might note certain times when something happens that my editor needs to deal with that moment. You know, the doorbell rings, the dogs bark, or whatever. But I left one in by mistake. I forgot to make a note of it, and I was getting attacked by a wasp. It wouldn't leave me alone. So halfway through talking, I think it was something like Napa Valley for level 3. I'm like, I'm doing this with my hands, and I'm going crazy. And then, of course, I don't communicate, so I make a mistake in not communicating that. The video goes up eventually a month later or whatever it may be, and then the comments start coming and go, "Jimmy, what happened at 9 minutes 22 or something like that?" And I'm like, "I don't know what happened." And I check the video out, and of course, it's me getting attacked by a wasp. And that's real life, right? We go through that all the time, and I think there's too much overtly polished content out there that some of these social media influencers are producing. It looks great, it looks flashy, but try and include realism, not necessarily real life, not your own personal life, because I do find that a bit weird. But I think realism and mistakes, and I like that. I like it because we're all we're none of us are perfect. We make a ton of mistakes,
I've
constantly.
been I've been leaving in my tasting videos a lot, sometimes mispronunciations or if I make a mistake going back instead of
Yeah.
editing it out, and that's the power of YouTube, especially. People comment, they're really watching the videos, whereas opposed to Instagram Reels, TikTok, where a view counts if people see it for a split second, they're scrolling through. On YouTube, people have to choose to watch the video. They have to click,
Mm,
they have to watch, and if they're saying in a 50-minute video what's happening at 9:22, they're engaged. They
yeah.
know. And I think what's interesting talking about you just I wanted to touch on it. You talk about this kind of YouTube is for me very I've always loved YouTube, even since its inception. And I find it fascinating that it's just the right amount of quote unquote, I don't want to, in our little niche world, like celebrity or fame. People know who you are because there's so few of us that are doing high quality content. Yet I could walk
Mm,
down the street and nobody knows who the heck I am. But in
mm.
our little niche, like we were just in San Gimignano together. I'm glad you came up and said hi to me. We were the only like real wine YouTubers there. I mean, I know you're doing a lot more than that, but I think that's one really cool thing about YouTube, the ability to connect with a concentrated audience.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, I like super. That's why I came up to see you, right, Matty? I was like, I respect your content. You're doing something. You're making such a good series of products. In terms of your videos on YouTube. And you're my bro. You're you're doing it in my social media sort of sphere. And you're getting the best out of it. So that's great. And you're right. It's been something which has been quite a challenge, a nice challenge for me. But I'm a typical Brit, that was quite a shy guy back when he was a teenager, and really had to sort of push myself to be a communicator in front of people. I've had to really adapt how I talk and how I communicate because I would be somebody who was just constantly full of long breaks and ums and ahs and really quite challenging, I suppose, to listen to. And I've had to adapt myself significantly over that time in order to communicate in the right way. But YouTube has been that platform for me. It's not just me taking several pictures of myself and doing several takes for a short 40-second or a 2-minute thing or whatever. I'm doing real intensive content which follows syllabus and can indulge it as well. And it has a long amount of time that I'm doing that. I'm putting out, goodness knows how much I put out in the last 5 years, but it's been thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of content. But people are liking it. People see that. And I could go anywhere in the world now and linking into what you said, being British, being a bit shyer, I'm having to adapt how I deal with people coming up, asking for autographs, asking for pictures. constantly. It's really nice, but it's also just a bit weird. But I've now kind of adapted myself. The weirdest point though about it is I like it, and please do come and say hi to anybody who wants to come and see me. Please do come and say hi. The weirdest thing is that if you copy my mannerisms, I find that weird. When people will say, yeah, they will go Jimmy, and then they'll do one of my catchphrases or something like that, and I'm like, whoa, hey, how's it going? So but I suppose it's just because they're so, let's say, they're so enveloped in Wine with Jimmy, or they've been listening to hours and hours with me, and I still find it weird. People email me going, Jimmy, loved it. I was in the car listening to you. I was on the treadmill listening to you. And all of these things, and I'm like, you know it, Matty. You get the same sort of feedback. It's like it's really lovely to hear, and they must spend so much time. Actually, I got to tell you one really funny thing is that the funniest emails I get, which I love, and please keep these coming. This goes out to all the partners, all the spouses of the person who's studying with me. Please keep giving me feedbacks. I love it because they're often like, Jimmy, thank you so much for helping my loved one, my partner, my boyfriend, girlfriend, wife, whatever. You've done really great stuff for them. And then the next time would be, but thank God I don't have to hear your voice again, especially when we're in bed, and things like that. I love those emails. I get a big giggle out of those emails. So it's
Oh, that's
wonderful.
great because you're, like, really in people's lives. I get, the same thing when I get wonderful comments. It's really touching. It just fulfills that, it's that psychic source of income, that stuff, that energy, the emotion. That's why we do this. And I find it funny that you were shy in the past because you dress quite eclectic. You stood out definitely when we were in San Gimignano. You dress quite eclectic, so quite loud, so to speak. So I'm surprised that you're shy. But along the same lines, what you're talking about, I still believe YouTube. If you do YouTube, you do it seriously, it's a great source of personal development. I mean, you have to learn so many skills, not only technical skills, but how to communicate, which never goes out of style. Even with AI and everything, I always tell people, if you know how to communicate with somebody or to move an audience, you will never, ever, ever be short of work.
Mm, yeah, no, I agree. With YouTube, you need to have a lot of skill sets. You mentioned it earlier, Matty, in terms of being able to be a friend with the camera. That's your first and foremost. I know that's very typical across many different platforms, but certainly with the amount of time you spend with it with YouTube, it's very important. Communication, absolutely pivotal, because if you can't communicate to a global audience, that's really important because you can probably communicate to your local audience, or you
Mm.
think you can, but the global audience is super important, and that means slowing yourself down. It means being specifically very concise on key points, and making sure that a global audience. So therefore, for people like you and I, a non-English speaking audience is going to find a way to enjoy the videos, and that may be through the translation for subtitles, for example. It's interesting because I've done a lot of that adapting. I've exited a lot of the ums and ahs out of my teaching when I'm communicating. I've got my own little methodology for that, but I've had to really also slow myself down. I teach in places like Georgia, so in Tbilisi, for example, and most of them are English speaking quite fluently, but it's not their natural language. So I've managed to really produce this slower speaking, but I get people commenting now and saying, Jimmy, I have to speed you up when I'm listening to you. I have to put you to 1.5 because you speak so slowly. And I'm like, well, yeah, but I take that as a real positive, except from one guy, which is brilliant as well. And this is what YouTube's great for, these wonderful comments that you can get, which can be fairly detailed, right? You can get into long conversations with great feedback with people. This comment I got from this guy was fantastic because he was like, "Jimmy, love what you're doing, blah blah blah, but you sound like a chipmunk when you talk." And I'm like,
I think that up to 2 times, right? Or
"Yeah,
three.
yeah, exactly what he did." So we were back and forth, and I was like, "Look, watch this video. I'm pretty sure I'm quite clear." And he said, "No, you're so fast, and I find it difficult." And then it got down to that point exactly. He was on 2 times speed, and then it was just the penny dropped at that moment, of course. So I'm not sure I'm going to get to the point where I need to be sped up to 2, but I know I'm being sped up to 1.5 by native English speakers.
If you like this content, I would like you to consider becoming a channel member. I have several tiers, but in the Grand Reserve tier, I have a monthly live hangout tasting where we talk shop, share wines. It's really difficult to find family and friends that are into wine like you and I are, and that's what this community is. There are perks for other members too, and it supports the work I do here. So thank you. Well, that's the power of YouTube. I think the comments you make are, especially in wine, I think wine producers and PR agencies, when they contact me, if I need something, I need samples or I need to go somewhere, when they look at the comments, they're like, wow, there's real engagement. That's the culture on YouTube to add real comments. There's only a handful of Instagrammers that actually have real comments versus just fire or glass or smiley emoji. There's real engagement. I mean, I think some Vivant, my friend Amanda McCrossan's the only one that when I look at her comments, they're real and they're real people wanting questions. But yeah, I get touching comments. I did a video in Tuscany, and one guy, Avignon Nussi was in the video. One guy said him and his wife, that was his favorite wine, and when she died, he spread his ashes in the vineyard that was in the video, and this brought back so many memories, and the wine meant so much more to him, and he really appreciated it, and I was like, "Wow, that's that's real powerful stuff."
Yeah, that definitely is, and that's wonderful that that emotion can be connected. It must give you such a good sense of being as well. But then they've also, I love that. I do want to one thing you mentioned a really good thing, and I want to just make sure that we tie this up because I think this is important. You mentioned it. You said validity of the comments because that's a valid comment that you're getting from that person. On some social media platforms, and I won't go into them specifically, but they are just those emojis. But they're also people just running the algorithm, right? Where they're
Exactly.
commenting just to fuel an algorithm. So that the circles that you find within the UK, for example, and it's going to be globally, where they're all in a group together, and they've all agreed to, of course, comment on each other's, posts and things like that, and that fuels that algorithm. On YouTube, I'm pretty sure you probably can have a go doing that, but that's certainly something that does not exist on Wine with Jimmy. It's all people's pure comments that they are either adding to the conversation, they are asking about the content, be it educational or the place or restaurants, food and wine matching, the education in terms of the actual syllabus, whatever it may be. It's pure, actual, great commentary that's going on there, not just that diatribe that comes through working the algorithm, which I think is super important in differentiating those.
I want to there's 2 major questions I wanted to ask you, and you're in touch. You see that actually the enrollment of WSET is going up throughout the years, whereas wine consumption's going down, which in a way could be contradictory. I actually see it a different way, but I'd love your thoughts on that because you see it. You're obviously the wine boy, you have a winery, and you're doing the education.
Yeah, I mean, to put it simply, a very simple way of answering that is that we're drinking wine less but better, right? And I think that's the direct way of doing it. So, listen, I think a lot of wine was drunk by millennials and even pre millennials, where we had, you know, the kind of rite of passage when you become drinking age, whatever country you may be in, which is just, getting hilariously drunk off like 3 liter box wine and things like that. That's been a big shift today. Generation Z certainly doesn't do that. And, there's a lot of complexities in this answer as well. There are lots of reasons why that's the case. I think there's a lot of health conscious. There's a lot of course, body conscious as well, and a lot of that's a very sort of troublesome area to get into. But then you've also got. I mean, I was speaking to my nephew who's in what is he now, 22, and he doesn't drink. Right, he has an uncle in me who is in the wine industry. Drinking wine at a moderate level, but at a high level, I suppose, drinking wine for the qualities within it and all of the beauty you can learn about it, and some of that should have rubbed off onto him, but hasn't. And his parents are keen drinkers as well, and they've done a lot of my courses, so they're certainly towards that level. But he just doesn't drink. So I just wanted a case study right there. I said, "The why?" And he said, "Look, I don't want to lose my," and this is not just wine, so this is all alcohol. "I don't want to lose my faculties, and I don't want someone to record that I am losing control." And that's quite interesting. that
No,
that
especially in the show me and especially in this generation where it's important to be seen. I too wish that I love wine for the organoleptic qualities, not to get drunk. Actually, I wish wine was lower in alcohol, but alcohol carries flavor, so that's impossible.
mm,
Because I can't I'm not I can't drink a ton. But in no way am I advocating that wine is quote unquote the healthiest thing known to man. But because it is a toxin. Alcohol is a toxin. The quality of alcohol I think is different. And I think people miss out a lot of like, let's talk about your nephew, the social benefits and what so like that does for your health. Because for me, the purpose of wine really is to keep the people that you love at the dinner table just a little bit longer or at the table so conversations can flow. You can connect better. That's what happens in the Mediterranean. It's more of a social
mhm.
thing. I think that's something that's drastically overlooked or not talked about enough.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this comes back to some of those real difficult legal discussions around. Let's look at Europe, right? If you look at somewhere like Italy and France, it's not uncommon that a child will be introduced to wine, both indirectly and directly. And by directly, I mean that they might be allowed to have a taste of it at a certain age, and that's before legal drinking age. And that's common, right? And I'm in it's this belief that it's very important to bring them up to respect the product. I've got 2 young children myself, and my kids are very young, but they're learning about little steps about the wine industry to learn all those multidisciplines and then to respect it. Because I think the issue with consumption of alcohol is when we don't have respect for it, and that's where problems can come from. Mass consumption, which can lead to, of course, a lot of mental and physical health problems. But when you respect the product, like you mentioned, for its taste, its organoleptic qualities, but also in all those disciplines that you can learn about it, that for me is what I feel like my nephew is missing out on. You're right, because yes, at the dinner table, or even just in conversation, maybe later on in his life or right now in his life, when he is, I don't know, his soon to be in-laws dinner table, or he's at a business meeting or whatever it may be, or he's just out with some people who are talking about wine. He's not able to have that conversation. And I think he could find himself like a lot of interest in certain areas. It might not be that he's going to become a massive advocate and ambassador for wine, but there's a lot to learn in there. Like we mentioned earlier, loads of disciplines, which is what I would urge to everybody. I really urge everybody, even if you're not a real avid wine fan or wine drinker, try and just sort of learn a little bit to give go in with an angle like, oh, I love talking about geology and seeing soils, or, I like geography, or I like learning about climate. I'm interested in climate change, which is a big hot topic, excuse the pun, but it is. And that might be something that gives you an inroad into learning about crop management overall, things like that. So, yeah.
Well, speaking of, I was fascinated. I didn't when we talked and had dinner in San Gimignano, I didn't realize that you had a winery. So what has producing wine and selling wine taught you? Because you have the educational side, also you now producing it and you gotta sell it. That's the toughest thing in wine, selling it.
Mhm. Yeah, no, you're exactly right, and especially in a heavily saturated market like the United Kingdom, where you get absolutely everything. Big challenge. Yeah, so I made the step in 2020. So this was around the same time that Wine with Jimmy was just starting. The decision was a family decision to move out from London into the countryside, so what we call a home county, so a county that's immediately outside of London. And we moved down into the Surrey-Sussex border with the aim of buying a property that we can grow into as a family. And my son had just been born, and my daughter, which it was in the planning stages, I suppose, at some point. But we decided that we needed a place to grow into, and that's going to include our future aspirations as well, not just as a family, but for the want of growing crops and having raised beds, having space to, we've got a large greenhouse, for example, but then also a place for the children to grow into and live. I'm a working class boy that had a very small townhouse when I grew up with a very small garden, and that's what I didn't want for my kids. I want them to have really let their imaginations run wild. I'm not saying mine didn't. I had a big imagination, but I just want them to have that land if they can, and that's certainly what we could offer them. And then a place that we could convert to a winery and a bit of land that we can plant to vine. I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of things in that, but we found what we believe is our ideal property. Um, as a family, absolutely loving it out here. We've got this beautiful barn, new barn build, which is great. We've got old stables, never used as stables, but we've converted them into the winery. The winery is called Bear Green Winery, which we launched in 2022. And then we're planting. We still haven't got round to planting the site, but it's going through its early stages. We're planting 1 acre here. Now, we're not planting to, take over the world. We're planting to really tie all of the dots, to really sort of tie all the businesses together. As an educator of wine, a communicator of wine that now has, 20 years under my belt, I got to a point where I'm either going to go, or should I do the MW or something similar? Or shall I do something which really takes me through agronomy, for example, and winemaking? And listen, I've got young kids. I'm a very busy person. Doing something like MW would really be contradictory into my current life style. And it would cause me to be away from my children a lot. It would cause me to be away from my wife a lot. And it just wouldn't work. So I decided, well, let put in a small vineyard, winery on site. So it's all around me. It's at my fingertips. So then I can give myself credibility also as a communicator to say that, yes, I actually grow grapes and I actually make wine. So we do a small scale production here. So we're family owned, a boutique winery, if you will. But we're small, low intervention, making authentic English wine. At the minute, we buy all of our grapes from a number of growers, but the aim will to be have a certain amount of that grown by our site here, only about 4 tons or so, 3 or 4 tons. But we buy the rest from growers that we've now built a really great relationship with in the last sort of 3 years or so. So we're going into our 4th vintage. Low intervention, like I mentioned, we do not add sugar, we do not add yeast, we do not add nutrients, we do not filter, but we will fine with a mushroom protein. So our products are vegan, vegetarian. We are trying to make authentic English wines. We won't tamper with acidity levels. They're going to have the natural high acids from England, for example, really reflective of the cold climate, but potentially the coldness of the year, like in 2023, for example. To make that authentic product, we make Pinot and Chardonnay as a clonal project.
Okay.
So I have deconstructed them into clones. We have 3 clones of Chardonnay, 2 clones of Pinot Noir. So we make them as individual
What are the
wines.
Pinot clones? What are the Pinot clones, brother? Let's get geeky here.
Geeky, let's get our geek on. So 777 and 114 is what we have. And the reason I've got those, I'm hopefully adding a German clones. They're 2 Dijon clones. I'm hopefully adding a German clone to the mix for this upcoming harvest. So I wanted to use 777 because it's known as the sexy jackpot clone, right, for producing still Pinot Noir. And there are many others, but that's a real top one. And then 114 is actually a champagne clone. So I wanted to immediately, in 2 individual wines, show the difference between those 2 clones, right? And then add on a German clone, a GE clone that you'll find across places like Baden and Rheinhessen and Alsace, for example. The Chardonnay is 95, 96, and 121. So one of the new breeds, actually, of clones. So I'm looking to sort of do that Richard Kershaw approach from South Africa, for example. Good friends of mine like Ilya and Nadia from the Leaning Post up in Niagara.
Oh,
craft
great
breeding
wines,
individual
yeah.
clones. Oh, epic wines. And I really like that. I fully admit that clones are not the be all and end all, but I think it's a very underrepresented discussion point along with rootstocks when we talk about wines, when these are fundamental factors that affect the style of wine. We're getting big into geology today. There's lots of great geological books coming out by Alex Maltman, for example, which are connecting the kingdom of dirt to the wine. And, we're getting great with that. Geography, climate, weather, we're all kind of experts in terroir at that level. But really, clones have a very small discussion, rootstocks an even smaller discussion. So I wanted to be a bit of a protagonist for that. So I do that. And then I do a lot of fun wines. So I do Bacchus on skins.
Okay.
Do a Vino Verde type wine with some, like a little bit of Frizzante with Pinot Gris and Bacchus. And then I do a really funky wine, which has a dinosaur, which is a Stegosaurus on the front of it, and a pig. It's actually a pig riding a Stegosaurus, and that's called Tickety Boosh, which is my real off-piece Luddite wine. It's just a very sort of old school wine, fining, no filtration, no sulfur added, uh, cloudy, funky sort of red. And you mentioned actually, Matty, that you said you couldn't drink too much. You like to drink in moderation, and you said that alcohol carries flavors as it rightly does. But I think you can still get beautiful character out of wines at about 10% alcohol, which is what
Oh,
we're at. We're at about 10, 10.5. Sometimes in good vintages 11. And my Pinot, because of a lot of the methodology behind it. It's not manipulating in wine making senses, adding yeast and tempering with acids and things like that. But I do a lot of little sort of innovative techniques to get real beautiful brightness and aromatic out of the Pinot. And a lot of people are very surprised when they find out, well, they're absolutely flabbergasted when they find out that there's that much aromatic. It's a light wine, but that much aromatic from 10% alcohol. So yeah.
I think that you hit the nail on the head about clones. I'm not a grape grower, but my father is a large scale produce farmer. I mean, we're like 1,000 hectares. That's how I grew up, and
Well,
obviously the variety and then the clone will determine the type of produce that you get that you can sell. So it just makes total sense. That's what I wanted to ask you. The most important question, because there's wine
uh,
professionals here
yeah.
probably listening. You when I hear I was in private practice before. I'm a chiropractor by training. I was in private practice. So yes, you have to have a funnel, you have to go down, you have to in my business, you gotta take care of patients, you gotta make sure they're happy, they gotta get well, you gotta make sure, that you have an ongoing relationship with them. Everything you say, fantastic. I'm really impressed with the little, empire that you've built of a little ecosystem.
Cut that.
Why do you think you see both sides of the world? I mean, we were on a press trip together. Why do you think so many wine professionals struggle at making money? And maybe some of your observations.
Wow. Okay. So struggling making money. Interesting. Okay. Well, let's start from looking at an overview of the wine industry. First of all, the wine industry is tiny, very, very small. So I think that there's a lot of players in a very similar market. So that's just coming from my own experience in terms, first of all, as a winemaker, if you think about it, I mentioned this earlier that trying to sell a product in the UK, and that's why wines are going into the US and Canada now, because it's easier to actually look at exports rather than the local market. Um, there's a lot of people that are attempting the same thing. So education, for example, in the UK, we are inundated with wine schools. There are so many of them. We are inundated with small independent wine shops, all doing a very similar model. And we see so many people that jump from being something like you mentioned, you said you were in chiropractic before, but maybe, business and finance and investing or whatever, and they jump into the wine industry, get all their qualifications, rightly go through the right methodology and right education, but then don't do it, and have to end up going back to something in their old life. Um, and I think that is because there is so much oversaturation in key areas. So I think that's one thing to think about with those examples I mentioned, education, but it may be retail as well. And you've got a lot of people doing the same thing on social media now, right? In terms of that kind of, oh, I can make it as a communicator, right? And that links me to my second point, I think, on this, which is not everybody who has knowledge. There's a lot of great people that have knowledge out there, but they're not able to communicate. So, and the disconnect between that is something that if they're trying to communicate through education or sales, it's not going to work for them. So, if they are in the wine industry and they're not somebody who is very sort of, I don't know, throw out some words, very genial, very friendly, very communicative, they're not going to do well because people are not going to warm to them, and they might be able to put out a chunk of knowledge, right? I brought this wine into this business because of this, and blah 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 blah. But if you're not able to actually be that person who's going to, I don't know, some word schmooze and work the circuit and things like that, it's not going to work for you. So I think there's so first of all, that over small market, a small amount of the wine industry, and there's too many people feeding into it potentially. But you've got to find your real niche in wine. And we're launching actually later this year a mentorship program through Wine with Jimmy and West London Wine School, which is going to help give you all the education you need. You'll get mentors like me and other winemaking team, etc. Here, you'll get options to come on press trips. You'll get options to work in the winery, grape growing. Do loads of great things to give you a multiple skill set that when you come out at the end of that, you have more of an opportunity to make money from wine. I think people think of it in a very sort of linear way, and they go, look, I'm going to get my qualification and I'm going to be able to make a chunk of money from wine because I love it. And I can see other people doing well. Someone like you, Matt, someone like me, we're doing decent in the world of wine, but I just don't think it's just not as easy as that. You've really got to create a niche and always be forever changing. What was it? The leopard, one of the one of the greatest bits of text in the world. If we want things to stay the same, we're going to have to change, and that is a wonderful line because for me, if I just stayed the same, producing the same sort of wine school, West London Wine School, through the problems of Brexit and through the problems of COVID, absolutely no chance that it will be on its 2 feet today. And also with how WSET have really upscaled their courses, their Wine School London, you've really got to adapt and you've got to learn to adapt in order to make money in this industry. So we've adapted to online education because COVID pushes into that. We've got a huge different model today, how we deal with students at the wine school. We're creating things like the mentorship program, for example. We've created Wine with Jimmy. Wine with Jimmy is now diversifying to create different things. There's live sessions happening. There are pre-recorded workshops I'm doing now with MWs and previous Vintner Scholarship winners at WSET, which is adding this extra bonus into it. And if I just sit back, like a lot of people actually did at COVID, just sit back and take the money, right, and just relax and spend some time thinking about the state of the world, I think you get left behind. And I think that happened to a lot of people during the difficult times of things like COVID. So I think you've got to create your niche. You've got to really work hard at it. And then you've got to keep constantly adapting around that. I don't know if that works as an answer.
That's a great answer. I think vision is important too. I know in private, I do not make the type of money I did in private practice,
Yeah.
and there was definitely a lot of moments the last couple years where I was like, "Man, maybe I should go back to my real life." But something just every time you question that, a light was illuminated in a path that's saying you're doing the right thing. And I think you're totally right. Building a niche is ridiculously important. And another thing, last thing to touch on is, I think that's what a lot of people miss if they want to be a wine communicator. In real business, they say often that it's 10% product and it's 90% marketing.
Mm.
And the marketing comes from the package, who you are as a person, how you communicate. So I appreciate you giving me some of your time, especially since I was late. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm never going to let somebody like that go.